After 10 years of being in love with Charles, he grew impatient and wanted to break up. I didn't dare to respond, afraid that if I said anything, the breakup would truly happen. I said softly, "Don't always talk about breaking up. What if I lose hope one day and really agree to it? Then we'll be completely over in this lifetime." Charles gave a cold, indifferent laugh. Later, one day, I got tired and decided to be the one to bring it up. Charles froze. He looked pitiful, almost pathetic, and said, "Don't keep talking about breaking up. What if I lose hope one day and really agree to it? Then we'll be completely over in this lifetime." Chapter 1. Charles was tying his tie when he glanced at me. His voice was cool and detached. "Lisa, why don't we break up?" I wrapped the blanket around myself, not knowing what to say. It was the third time this month he had brought it up. "What is it this time?" I asked quietly. "No reason. I just don't feel like continuing anymore." Charles finished putting on his suit, lowered his gaze to look at me lying in bed, and frowned. "Aren't you going to work today?" I opened my mouth, wanting to remind him that I had quit my job a few days ago. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced down at it, and the corners of his lips lifted into a faint, handsome smile. His slender fingers tapped quickly on the screen. I didn't know what he was replying to, but that smile kept deepening. After finishing his message, Charles tucked his phone away, his smile fading. He looked at me again. "Think about what I said, Lisa." I stayed silent. Just as he was opening the door to leave, I called out to him, "Charles." I took a deep breath. "You're not cheating on me, are you?" Charles stopped. After a moment, he shook his head. "No." Then he added, "Lisa, don't wait until we're completely disgusted with each other to break up." I froze. Already? Are we already at that point? When we first got together, Charles had sworn he'd treat me well for life. He promised he would never betray me. And now, only 10 years later, he's forgotten all about those vows. I sighed. I don't really have family. I'd been with him since my first year of high school. He's my only family. And honestly, I can't let go. Looking at his tall, slender back, I couldn't help but feel a little wronged. "Charles, don't keep talking about breaking up. What if I lose hope one day and really agree to it? Then we'll be completely over in this lifetime." Charles chuckled, a laugh so indifferent it almost hurt. He told me he wouldn't be home for dinner tonight. Then he paused and said, "I might be home late, even for sleep." "Oh," I gave a faint reply, watching as he closed the door and left. Chapter 2. Charles was always a rather straightforward man. When he stopped loving someone, he didn't bother finding excuses. He just said it bluntly, "Break up." Now that he said he wasn't cheating, I could only assume he hadn't reached that step yet. But I knew deep down, there was already someone else in his heart. Someone who made him stare at his phone endlessly. Someone who occupied almost all of his time. Charles hadn't kissed me in a year. This past year, home had become nothing more than his place to eat, sleep, and shower. Every other moment, he spent holding that phone. At first, he'd just smile at the screen quietly without saying anything. Then he began replying with a few words. Later, his replies became long paragraphs. Then came voice messages, and eventually, late-night voice calls whispered in the bathroom, and video calls in the underground parking lot after work. He forgot that the car had an onboard recorder. I could hear the subtle tremor in his voice when he answered those calls, the kind that only appeared when he was happy. I couldn't help wondering, had he completely stopped loving me? Had I somehow become that pitiful one people whisper about, the woman who still clings to love while being the outsider in her own relationship? Chapter 3. That night, Charles didn't come home for dinner. I made something simple for myself, ate a few bites, then lay on the bed watching TV. By coincidence, a talk show about relationship disputes was on. A wife was clutching her husband, screaming hysterically, "I gave you everything. Why did you have to go after that homewrecker?" Her makeup was ruined, her nails were broken, and she cried until her face twisted in pain. Her husband shoved her away. "Look at you! Who could still want a woman this ugly?" I was startled. When a woman is betrayed, is she still supposed to look perfect and speak gracefully? Suddenly, I pictured Charles and that girl. If they ever ended up together, I'd probably cry and scream too. And how would Charles treat me then? I turned off the TV and stared out the window for a long time. No matter how I thought about it, Charles would eventually leave me. The girl had added me on WeChat 2 days ago. She said she couldn't reach Charles and needed him to sign an urgent document. But how did she get my contact information? When I asked, she giggled and said, "I remembered your number from when Charles called you before." That confident, smug smile, it was obvious she was lying. If she already had the official girlfriend's contact, it meant she was just one step away from taking my place. Maybe it was time for me to plan a graceful farewell. My eyes started to sting. I picked up my phone and called Charles. He seemed to be having lunch, and I heard a bright, crisp female voice beside him. She was chattering cheerfully, teaching him how to dip fried chicken wings into chili sauce. I felt dazed. Charles worked out religiously. He hadn't eaten anything fried in ages. He lived like an ascetic, refusing even the slightest bit of oil. But when the call connected, I clearly heard the girl whisper, "Just one bite. Come on." And Charles's calm voice replied, "Okay." Then came the sound of him chewing. He swallowed slowly, and only then did he ask, "What's up, Lisa?" I took a deep breath. "Charles, do you really want to break up?" After a few seconds, he said quietly, "Yes." "Then break up with her," I said, biting my lip, "and stay with me for one more month. For that month, whatever I want to do, you'll do it with me. After that, I'll agree to break up." Charles didn't hesitate for more than 2 seconds. "All right." Then I heard a sulky, playful whine in the background, followed by his deep, tender voice, "Be good. Don't make trouble." That low, magnetic tone was intoxicating. Even now, those words weren't said to me anymore. Chapter 4. Charles didn't come home that night. He sent me a video, said he was at a friend's place. He told me he'd be staying there for the entire month, so I could slowly get used to a life without him. I didn't reply. That night, I dreamed a chaotic, endless dream. In the dream, we were young, thinking forever was easy to keep, believing love could outlast time. So we dared to give everything, to bet it all without hesitation. When I woke up, I sent Charles a message. "Today's the weekend. Go back to S City with me." S City, the place where we both grew up, where we went to school, only a 3-hour drive from here. We attended S City No. 1 high school together. Back then, Charles wasn't good at studying, but he always had a lot of study materials. I had no one to rely on. Even paying tuition meant begging and borrowing from others. I used to pick up discarded practice books from the trash and do the exercises. I sat in the corner of the classroom, with thick bangs covering my forehead, black-rimmed glasses hiding half my face, always looking down. I didn't like talking to people, and no one talked to me. But Charles was naturally outgoing. He walked straight up to me, lifted my bangs, and said I had a pretty forehead, told me to show it. Then he handed me a few brand new workbooks. "If I don't finish these this semester," he said dramatically, "my mom's gonna break my legs. Help me out, will you?" I looked down at those clean, untouched books, and my eyes stung a little. When I looked up again, he was sitting casually on the window ledge. Sunlight poured through the glass, catching the messy strands of his hair and lighting up that bright, youthful face. Back then, his eyes were so lively, like a friendly, big dog. If you smiled at him, you could almost see his tail wagging like a propeller. People you meet when you're young can be dazzling, so dazzling that when they leave, despair feels endless, because someone like that can never be replaced. Charles still hadn't replied. I didn't rush him. I lay there scrolling through my social media feed and saw a post from my senior from graduate school. He'd uploaded a photo with the caption, "Back in full strength." I gave it a like. He'd been abroad for 2 years. Before leaving, he'd even messaged me, asking if I wanted to meet up before his departure. But Charles had caught the flu then, and I was afraid of passing it to my senior, so I didn't go. Maybe he noticed my like, because he messaged me asking which company I was working at now. I was just about to reply when the door opened. Charles stood there, wearing a charcoal gray coat. "I thought we were going to S City," he said. I froze for a moment, then quickly got up to wash and change. Charles sat quietly on the couch, waiting for me, just like he used to every morning when we first moved in together. Only this time, the corners of his lips weren't curved upward. They were pressed into a straight, expressionless line. He drove. I sat in the passenger seat. He played some random song, a sugary pop tune by a trending girl group. The melody was sticky sweet. Not at all his style, nor mine. I glanced at him instinctively and saw a tiny teddy bear pin fastened to his sweater. It was cute. A mark of someone else, a young girl's little signature. I turned my head away, looking out the window instead. Charles spoke in a calm tone. Sooner or later, I'll belong to another woman. Lisa, you have to face reality and stop living in the past. Feelings always fade. There's no such thing as forever in this world. I nodded, but involuntarily. I remembered the boy he used to be, that bright, radiant boy who once promised to protect me forever. I once believed old friends' hearts wouldn't change easily. But who could have known? He'd tell me that the human heart was made to change. Chapter 5. We reached S City soon. The city was still the same, cold, dry. The kind of air that turned your breath into visible clouds the moment you spoke. Charles drove straight to S City No. 1 High School. Get out, he said simply. He thought I wanted to revisit our first love. But I shook my head. I want to go to the S City family housing compound. Before leaving home, I had planned to visit our school, to see our classroom, the playground where we secretly held hands, and the patch of grass where we once sat side by side drinking milk tea. But the moment I saw that little teddy bear pin on his sweater, I changed my mind. I wanted to go back to the housing compound where I was born and raised, to see what kind of mark my miserable childhood had left on me. The kind that made me so desperate for closeness, so terrified of letting go. Even when love had already turned to dust. Charles had hardly ever been to S City. He was the son of a university professor, never short of food or clothes. That world was miles apart from the one in S City's old, shabby neighborhood full of laid-off factory workers. Back then, I never let him visit my home. I didn't want him to see that world. The gray, decaying, hopeless, humiliating one I came from. And now, I was leading him through it. We stood on a cracked, uneven road. I pointed toward a dilapidated building, its balcony cluttered with pigeon cages and strings of faded laundry. That's where I grew up, I told Charles. He looked startled, glancing from the building back to me. You're so quiet and refined, I wouldn't have guessed you were from here. I smiled bitterly. It's not refinement, it's fear. Charles said nothing. He just kept staring at that old building, at the pigeons bursting from the broken balcony, their droppings splattering on quilts hung out to dry below. A child's wailing escalated into a parent's shouting match. A man and a woman hurled insults at each other, their words cutting deep and vulgar, their pain as raw as the cold wind. It was a scene Charles had never witnessed, and one I'd spent half my life trying to hide from him. Hands shoved in my coat pockets, I tilted my head and looked at his profile. When, I wondered, did I start making him my entire world? Even my whole life? What turned me into this? Someone who knows she's no longer loved, but still clings on shamelessly. As if holding him could keep me from drowning? I thought about it for a long time, and then I remembered. It was on a winter solstice. My father was in the building ahead, keeping company with the widow Wang and her daughter. My mother was in the one behind, talking to Uncle Wang about getting married. Everyone else was making dumplings for the holiday. I sat alone in a dark apartment, no electricity, no heat. From my window, I could see neighbors laughing in their kitchens, families gathered around tables, warm light spilling onto frosted windows. I suddenly wanted dumplings too, but there was no flour, no vinegar, only a bit of minced meat that a neighbor had given me. I thought I could just wait until morning. But for some reason, that night, I couldn't bear it anymore, so I called Charles. Can I borrow some flour? I asked. Or vinegar, if you have it. I told him. My parents are away on a business trip. I'm making dumplings alone, but I ran out of flour and vinegar. Charles paused for a moment, then chuckled. Wait for me at home, he said. I couldn't let him see the wreck that was my house, the poverty, the shame, the darkness that swallowed everything. So I waited at the entrance of the compound instead, under the streetlight. His hair was messy from running, the ends catching the golden glow of the light. Tall and broad-shouldered, yet still boyishly innocent. He carried a thermos in one hand and a bottle of vinegar in the other. When he ran toward me, the frozen heart in my chest began to thaw. "I was afraid you'd burn your hands," he said, a little out of breath. "So I brought dumplings from home, and vinegar too. Come on, eat before it gets cold. I'll walk you back." I shook my head. "I want to eat here." I didn't want him to see the hopeless darkness waiting inside. Charles blinked in surprise. "You're right. Girls should be careful. Don't invite boys home alone." I laughed, crouched down, poured vinegar over the dumplings, and took a bite. It was warm, warmth that spread from my stomach all the way to my chest. After that night, whenever I heard the word warmth, I always thought of that boy under the streetlight, and the dumplings we shared by the road. In that fleeting moment, I felt like I had a family again. I couldn't change the one I was born into. But Charles, he was the family I chose for myself. And I thought, a family I chose on my own would never abandon me. Chapter 6. I walked with Charles through the old family housing compound. After so many years, most people who could move out had already left. The ones who remained were those tangled in fate, trapped beneath the weight of despair. Halfway through our walk, a hesitant voice called out, "Lisa, is that you?" I froze. It was my mother's voice. Turning around, I saw her wearing a faded down jacket, so thin it had lost its warmth. She was holding a little girl by the hand. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with surprise and joy. Then she looked at Charles and smiled. "You're back. Why didn't you tell me? I could have cooked some meat for you too." I lowered my eyes. "Where would you cook it?" She said nothing. When she married Uncle Wong, he'd made it very clear. He didn't want me, the extra burden. I was told to fend for myself. The old apartment that once belonged to my parents, she'd rented it out for income. So where could she possibly cook? Where would we eat? Unable to answer, my mother could only give me a strained smile. I turned to leave. She hurried forward and pushed the little girl toward me. "Call her sister." Then she rubbed her hands together awkwardly, forcing a laugh. "Lisa, you're earning money now. Your stepdad and I don't have much. Your sister's taking piano lessons with the best teacher in S City, and the costs are really crushing us." I stomped my foot. The cold of S City still cut through the bones just like before. I gave her a small smile. A child born into a certain family has to accept whatever that family can offer. Don't you think? That was what Uncle Wong told me years ago, the day he said I was on my own. I never imagined that one day I'd throw his words right back. My mother's face turned pale. She couldn't say a word. It was as if the boomerang of her own cruelty had finally come back to slice her open. I turned away. Charles followed behind, frowning. She looked pitiful. "Lisa," he said softly, "you didn't have to be so harsh. If it's about money, I can cover it." I laughed coldly. When I went 3 days without food, drinking tap water just to stay alive, I begged her for a little money. Her husband told me to fend for myself. And now you want to pay for their daughter's piano lessons? I looked at him sharply. "You rich boys raised in honey, is this how you spread your positive energy?" My tone wasn't calm like usual, because that little girl's neat clothes, her clean, polished hands, they burned my eyes like sunlight on glass shards. Charles opened his mouth but didn't speak. After a while, he reached out and wrapped an arm around my shoulder. His voice softened, a tone I hadn't heard from him in a long time. "You never told me any of this." I exhaled, watching my breath turn to mist. "Because once I told you, it would be over between us." Charles's arm stiffened slightly. I stopped in front of a small convenience shop and looked inside. To call it a shop was generous. The snacks on the shelves were probably half a year past expiration. A group of men were playing cards inside, surrounded by stacks of greasy old bills. Most were bald, with thick necks and heavy faces. I stepped forward, but Charles grabbed my arm. "What do you need?" "I'll go." I brushed past him, pointed to the roughest-looking man in the room, and said quietly, "That's my father." My father had already been in and out of prison 4 times. When he saw me, he froze for a second. "Well, if it isn't my girl," he laughed. Then his eyes landed on Charles. "Your husband. Huh? Not bad, looks like a rich one." He kicked at the money on the floor and grinned. I was wondering why my luck's been bad lately. Turns out my daughter brought her rich man to deliver me some cash. Charles stood there, speechless. I imagined he must have recognized the type. My father was the kind of man every woman and child in the neighborhood feared. To call him a monster wouldn't be exaggeration. I picked up a bottle of soda, twisted the cap open, and took a sip. "This isn't your son-in-law," I said calmly. "He's my colleague. Just gave me a ride." My father scowled. "What? You think I'll ask you for money?" I pointed at Charles's chest, where the coat gaped open to reveal the sweater, and that delicate little bear pin. "See that? A girl gave it to him. It means he's taken. No one else should bother." My father looked at the pin, then laughed. "Oh, yeah, that's definitely not your doing. You grew up knowing cigarettes, booze, and knives, but not these silly trinkets." I smiled faintly. I knew far worse things than trinkets. I knew all the prostitutes who worked under him too. My father pulled a burly man over, muscles bulging, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Don't leave this time. Girl, Dad will find you a man. This one's loaded, owns several big trucks, and he's lucky at cards." The man sized me up, grinning, and reached out to shake my hand. Charles yanked me behind him. "She doesn't want to," he snapped. Then he grabbed my wrist and led me away. He walked fast, as if afraid my father might drag me back to marry one of his drinking buddies. He didn't stop until we reached the gate of the housing compound. His brows were knit tight, and in his eyes flickered something I hadn't seen for a long time. Sympathy, and maybe sorrow. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but I shook my head. "I'm tired. Let's not talk right now." In the eyes of the man I loved, I was supposed to be a decent, normal woman. The moment I tore open my ugliness, it would mean I was ready to end this love myself. Chapter 07. I slept all the way until we were almost back in the capital. When I opened my eyes, I noticed that the little bear brooch on Charles's sweater was gone. He asked me, "Back in high school, you didn't talk much. Always so quiet. Was it because of what happened in your family?" I smiled. "Yeah." Charles coughed lightly. You didn't see me as some kind of savior, like in those TV dramas, did you?" His long fingers tapped the steering wheel. I could tell he was uneasy. I shook my head. "No." Charles quietly exhaled in relief. Then I added, "I saw you as the family I chose for myself." Charles glanced at me. I sniffled and looked out at the withered winter landscape flashing by. "I thought that if you could sit with me on the roadside eating dumplings, then you could walk with me for a lifetime. I thought that even if I no longer had a home, by holding on to you, I could piece together a new one." But in the end, we still followed the same path as my parents. I heard that back in the day. My mom and dad also loved each other fiercely, passionately, like they couldn't live without each other. And yet, that love quietly faded, leaving nothing but scattered mess and broken feathers. Charles took a deep breath, freed one hand from the steering wheel, and held my cold one. "I can still be your family. We can eat dumplings together. I'll make a reservation at Bai Huiyuan tonight." It had been a long time since I last held Charles's hand. His hand was still beautiful, long, clean fingers, warm to the touch, but somehow, it no longer felt like the boy he once was, bright, passionate, and simple, like a big loyal dog. I pulled my hand back, leaned against the car window, and pretended to sleep. Charles asked what kind of dumplings I wanted. I shook my head. "I'm not eating. Otherwise, your little girlfriend might start to worry." I'd accepted my fate. I would always be that unwanted wild child from the S-City family compound. A few plates of dumplings, 1 or 2 people, none of that could change destiny. No one would ever love me forever, no matter how shamelessly I tried to hold on. I fell asleep again. When we were close to Beijing, Charles shook me awake from my daze. "Do you want me to turn back?" he asked, half asleep. I murmured, "I've already shown all my cards. Even if you turn back now, I won't." Charles was silent for a long time. I drifted back into sleep. Chapter 08. When we were almost home, Ignacio, my senior from college, called and woke me up. He asked, "Why didn't you reply to my messages? Where are you working now?" I forced out a few words through clenched teeth. "Haven't found a job yet. I just want to take a break." He went quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's a pity." While driving, Charles asked, "Who was that?" "Ignacio," I said. Charles's hand froze on the steering wheel. Back in college, Charles used to get jealous of Ignacio all the time. He frowned. "Can you hang up first? Talking on the phone distracts me." Ignacio heard that and chuckled. "Still the same childish guy," he said before hanging up. When we got home, Charles wanted to walk me upstairs, but his phone rang. A delicate, sweet voice complained on the other end about not having seen him all day. Charles didn't reply, covering the receiver. He looked at me, guilt flickering in his eyes. I waved at him. "Well then, goodbye." Turning away, I went upstairs, switched on the warm yellow lights of the living room, and glanced out the window. Charles was still downstairs. He hung up the call and sent me a message. "Suddenly remembered those younger days, when my eyes were full of you. I don't think I'll ever love that purely again." I didn't reply. That night, I had another dream. In the dream, I was making dumplings, lots and lots of them. I called my mom. She said she had to take my little sister to piano lessons. I called my dad. He was back in prison. Then I called Charles. He came right away. The clear-eyed boy, smiling brighter than the sun. But just as he picked up a dumpling, a girl called him, and he stood up to leave. No matter how many times I called after him, he never turned around. In the end, I finished all the dumplings by myself. No vinegar, bland and cold. But still, I ate every single one. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Chapter 09. Ignacio called me again. "You love design so much. How can you just stop? Isn't that wasting your talent?" I lowered my head, silent. I really do love interior design. I love the feeling of building a warm home from nothing, piece by piece. Even if that home isn't mine, I still feel happy. Ignacio said, "I've started my own company. Do you want to join me?" I'd been so tired lately, a little hesitant, but Ignacio knows me too well. He added, "Don't you want to build that home you've always dreamed of in your heart?" I gripped my phone tightly, thought for a long while, and nodded. Once I joined Ignacio's firm, he didn't give me a moment to wallow in old feelings. He took on a few projects right away, and I was suddenly buried in work. Every day, I barely had time for makeup or skincare, always rushing around, but the corners of my mouth were constantly curved upward. Through the glass wall of his office, Ignacio often watched me, giving me a thumbs up. After work, he'd invite me to dinner, passing me some food. He'd say, "A young woman should keep herself busy, busy making money, busy building a name for herself. Just don't waste time moping at home over love." Tell me, who could ever love you more than you love yourself? I lowered my head, smiled, and said nothing. Ignacio's tone grew serious. "Lisa, if you truly didn't love yourself, how could you have dragged yourself out of that kind of family background, put yourself through college, and earned a master's degree? You'd have ended up like your father long ago." My hand froze midair. I looked up at Ignacio, not even noticing that my chopsticks had fallen. It was the first time anyone had ever said that I actually loved myself. Ignacio had seen my father when he came to visit me after being released from prison. He handed me a new pair of chopsticks. "If you didn't love yourself, how could you have picked other people's homework out of the trash? How could you have longed so much for someone to eat dumplings with you? Lisa, you don't need anyone else's love. The one who's loved you most, never gave up on you, who's always wanted to pull you out of the mud, that's always been you. The you who picked up those papers from the trash. So why keep waiting for others? The only person who's ever truly saved you has always been yourself." I lowered my head to eat, tears falling one by one onto my chopsticks. Since childhood, I'd scavenged and been mocked, insulted, never shedding a single tear. But now, I couldn't stop crying. Ignacio handed me a tissue. "My dad's been in and out of prison too. When your father came to see you at school that day, I knew you were one of those people who forced themselves to walk into the sunlight. We're the same." I nodded, taking big bites of food. When we finished, I insisted on paying the bill, then smiled at him. "Senior, give me a few more projects. I want to save up to buy a house." Outside, the sunlight was perfect. The sun is fair, it doesn't care who you are. or where you come from, or whether you have a family. As long as you want to stand in the sun, it will shine on you. Chapter 10. I was getting busier and busier. So busy that I didn't get home until 10 every night. Ignacio told me to take a break, but I didn't want to. I designed homes for so many people, except for myself. I wanted to design one just for me. A home that would never betray me. First, I had to buy one. The apartment I lived in now had been bought by Charles's family. I sent Charles a message saying I'd be moving out in 3 days. He didn't reply for a long time. When he finally did, it was just a few words: stay there, don't move. But I still packed up my things bit by bit. Busier than ever. Not getting home until 10:30. When I opened the door, I was startled. Someone was sitting at the dining table. My bag dropped to the floor. He turned around, and I saw that it was Charles. Charles's eyes lingered on the cashmere pencil skirt under my coat. Where have you been? Worked late, I said. Why are you here? I'll be moving out the day after too. Charles stood up and stepped aside, revealing the table behind him. I didn't come to rush you. I came to eat dumplings with you. Behind him, 2 plates of dumplings sat cold, long since losing their warmth. Charles's voice was heavy. I came at 6, followed an online tutorial and made them myself, but now they've gone cold. He frowned. I called you, but you didn't pick up. Sent messages. You didn't reply. You weren't out celebrating the winter solstice with someone else, were you? Only then did I remember, it was the winter solstice today, a day for eating dumplings. Just as I was about to reheat them, Ignacio called. I know you eat dumplings on the solstice. He said, I'm out on a business trip. Couldn't take you out, so I ordered some for you. Are you home now? I am, I replied, thinking about how he'd nagged me earlier, insisting I leave work on time. I couldn't help but smile, so that was his little secret. I hung up, still smiling. When the delivery arrived, a few boxes of dumplings from Baihuayuan, steaming and fragrant. I set them on the table and gestured to Charles. If you haven't eaten, sit down and have some. Charles didn't move, just stood there staring at me. His tone sank. You sounded so happy talking to him. I didn't answer, only said, come eat. He stayed where he was. Was that Ignacio? I nodded. I work at his company now. He's my boss. What a coincidence. Charles let out a cold laugh. Not a coincidence at all. He likes you, you know that. I opened the takeout container and picked up a dumpling. It was delicious. Turns out dumplings don't have to be handmade. The bought ones taste better. Charles saw I wasn't answering him and suddenly grabbed my chopsticks. What are you thinking? Do you even know that Ignacio's father went to prison? I froze, swallowed my bite, and looked up at him with a smile. My dad went to prison too, so I guess that makes us a good match. Charles stood there by the table, his face pale. I picked up another dumpling. It's really good. You sure you don't want any? Charles apologized. I didn't mean it. Lisa, I just forgot about your family. I waved my hand. Charles, just let me eat in peace, okay? Since you stopped loving me, I haven't had a proper meal that tasted this good. Charles stood there, caught between leaving and staying. Finally, he pushed the plate of dumplings he'd made toward me. 10 years ago, on the winter solstice, I brought you dumplings. Of course I remembered. Maybe I'd remember until the day I died. But 10 years had passed. The dumplings didn't taste the same anymore. Chapter 11. I moved out and got even busier. So busy that I forgot about the 1-month promise between Charles and me until he called to remind me. Since I was the one who had suggested it, and Charles brought it up so gently, I couldn't refuse. After thinking for a moment, I said, how about visiting my university? We had both gone to college in the capital, but not the same one. I used to visit him a lot more than he ever came to see me. We walked together along the lake on my campus, and I couldn't help remembering how the few times Charles did come to my school were always after Ignacio had made him jealous. There were so many male students around, but for some reason, Charles only ever worried about Ignacio. Ignacio and I had taken the same electives, so we often walked together after class, and Charles would chase after us to argue, talking about those old days now, how Ignacio once got drunk several times and nearly fell into the lake. We both laughed. Charles shook his head with a smile. I was so stupid back then. You loved me so much. And yet I kept doubting you. How could you possibly have had feelings for Ignacio? I lowered my head without answering. Charles paused, then pressed. Why aren't you saying anything? You did love me with all your heart back then, didn't you? I looked up. I'm sorry. I wanted to love you with all my heart. But with someone like Ignacio, tell me, who wouldn't be moved by him? The smile froze on Charles's lips. You said you'd only ever be with me. I sighed, and I was only with you. I may have been moved. Yes, but I remember the vow I made to you, that I would never betray you. I met his eyes. Charles. I used to believe that once a person swore something, they could never break it. So even if I was moved, that's where it stopped. Charles went silent, stunned. He let go of my hand, staring down at the lake water. I wondered if he remembered, back then, by this same lake. He had begged me not to be with Ignacio and had sworn he'd love me for life. Never change. Now the lake was still there, but the oath had long since faded away. We walked forward in silence. After a long while, Charles finally said, Lisa, I'm sorry. I smiled faintly and shook my head. It's okay. When you made that promise, I know you meant it. That's enough. His eyes turned red. When I swore it, my heart was completely full of you. I really thought nothing would ever change. Chapter 12. I showed Charles around my university. Back when he used to visit me, I always wanted to give him a proper tour, but every time, we ended up arguing because of Ignacio. Now we finally had the chance to walk around calmly, but it was already over between us. When we passed the school's display wall, Charles suddenly stopped. He looked at the wall, then at me, disbelief in his eyes. He stepped closer, staring at it for a long moment. Finally, he turned to me. You won this award? It was the gold medal from the youth design competition, a prestigious one. At the time, Charles had been busy preparing for his internship, anxious and restless every day. So I hadn't told him. Now, seeing that old photo of my younger self, my face fresh, my smile innocent, my eyes shining with love for design and hope for the future, I couldn't look away. Charles was still dazed. With credentials like that, you could have gotten into any company easily. If I'd known, I wouldn't have asked my friend to pull strings for you. I smiled and lowered my head. That friend, Charles had already asked him for a favor back then, and for his sake, I couldn't refuse. What happened afterward, best not to mention. I checked the time. I had to head back to work. As we walked toward the gate, we both spoke at once. He was faster. Lisa, I think I never really understood you. Almost at the same moment, I said, let's forget about the 1-month deal. I forced a smile. Let's end it. Charles, I'm setting you free. I thought that ending things early would make him happy, but he just pressed his lips together. Saying nothing, I said goodbye, turned, and walked toward the subway station. Behind me, Charles called out, saying he had something to tell me. I hesitated for a second, but didn't turn back. Chapter 13. Back at the company, I buried myself in work for days and finally got promoted to manager. Ignacio kept urging me to take a break, but I wanted to buy my own apartment as soon as possible. He looked over my design drafts and clicked his tongue in admiration. Lisa, you're absolutely stunningly talented. He reached out to pat my head. You were born to shine. Why trap yourself in that courtyard of yours, covering yourself with dust again and again? He flicked my forehead lightly, not painful, just a soft, tingling touch. Then he said, this year, come spend the new year with me in the South. They don't eat dumplings down there. We'll try something different. I looked at him for a long time, the corners of my lips slowly lifting. All right, no dumplings this year. That evening, after finishing some overtime work, Ignacio and I planned to try out a new trendy hot pot restaurant. But the moment we walked in, of all coincidences, I saw Charles. He was sitting with a group of people, celebrating a young woman's birthday. Everyone else was laughing and singing, but he looked distracted, fiddling with his phone. A second later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Charles. Had a few drinks. Can we meet? I have something to tell you. I sighed, not telling him that I was right across from him. Just then, A waiter carrying a steaming pot passed by. Ignacio put his arm around my shoulders to shield me from the hot broth. At that exact moment, Charles looked up, and our eyes met. The girl was making a wish over her cake. When she finished, she grabbed Charles's hand, and there I was, standing in Ignacio's arms, quietly watching the two of them. Charles's eyes turned red. Little by little, suddenly, he pushed the girl's hand away and rushed over to grab me. Lisa, please, come back. Let's start over. Just one more time. I tried to pull free, but his grip was too strong. Charles had never held me so tightly before, almost as if he wanted to tear me away from Ignacio by force. Thankfully, Ignacio let go of me before I could get hurt from the struggle. Then he swung a punch at Charles. You're hurting her. What do you think she is, a thing you can just drag around? Charles, his eyes bloodshot, lunged at Ignacio. The two of them fought amid the pungent, spicy air of the hot pot restaurant. Waiters rushed over to break it up. Some people filmed, others watched. Someone even called the police. Only the young girl and I stood apart, facing each other through the chaos. She screamed at me, "It's my birthday! Why did you have to pick today?" I just smiled at her, saying nothing, just like that time on WeChat, when I'd asked her what kind of relationship she had with Charles, and all she'd sent me in reply was a single smiling emoji. When the police arrived, Ignacio and Charles had already stopped fighting. I asked a waiter for some gauze and iodine, then knelt beside Ignacio to clean his wounds. Charles froze, staring at me for a long time before finally trembling as he spoke. Lisa, I'm hurting too. Ignacio let out a cold laugh. Hurting? Good. You deserve it. You don't deserve to be with Lisa. Charles's eyes blazed. We've been together for 10 years. How am I not worthy? Ignacio spat to the side. I decided to go abroad for good. You know why I came back? Charles wiped the blood from his mouth, glaring. Wasn't it just to steal her from me? Ignacio laughed bitterly. No, it's because of you. You bastard. You're the one who got Lisa referred to that disgusting old man's company. And for your pride, she couldn't refuse to go. His voice trembled with anger as he went on. That pervert tried to assault her during a business trip. Got her drunk. Lisa locked herself in the bathroom and couldn't reach you no matter how many times she called. She had to video call me. I was abroad. But she made it seem like I was in the same city, on my way to pick her up, just to buy time until the police arrived. Ignacio's fists clenched. And after all that, your dear friend claimed Lisa seduced him. At your precious company. They all believed him, called her a temptress. She was humiliated and forced to resign. That's what you did for her. With every word. Charles's face grew paler. He suddenly turned to me, his voice trembling. He's lying, isn't he? Lisa, tell me, he's lying, right? It's true. I closed my eyes for a moment. My nose and throat burned. My eyes stung. Every word of it. Charles's hands began to shake. Why didn't you tell me? I gave a short, broken laugh. Then tears burst out. Hot and unstoppable. That day I couldn't reach you. Later you said your secretary was sick, and you took her to the ER. When they accused me of seducing that man, I wanted to call you too. But the first thing you said when you finally picked up was that you wanted to break up. Charles, tell me, how was I supposed to explain anything to you? When did you ever give me the chance? Charles stood there, stunned. He stared at me for a long time before finally whispering, his voice cracking. Lisa, in your heart, I'm just a bastard, aren't I? Yes. Chapter 14. When we left the police station, my only thought was to get Ignacio's wounds treated at the hospital. Charles trailed behind us, looking completely lost, until that young girl grabbed his arm. Aren't you going to give me an explanation? She demanded. Charles snapped. Let go of me. We were never even official. What do I owe you an explanation for? I sighed and got into the car with Ignacio, the boy who once looked at me with bright, honest eyes. He would never have said something like that. Time really does change people. I never imagined that someone as proud as Charles could ever look this broken. Every night after I finished working overtime, I would see him standing downstairs from my office, at first in a light trench coat for early winter, later in a long down jacket for the deep cold, always holding a cup of coffee or a sandwich, trying to hand them to me. But I couldn't eat. Ignacio already took care of all my meals. I was never hungry anymore. By the second month of his waiting, I finally stopped walking past him. Some things needed to be said. Rubbing my temples, I told him, "We've already broken up. Charles, you shouldn't be following me around like this." He kept his head down, his chin covered in stubble, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Lisa," he said quietly, "a breakup needs both sides to agree." I didn't agree, so we're still together. I gave a bitter laugh. "Charles, you're the one who cheated first." He froze, saying nothing, just watched me get into the car, and as I was closing the door, he asked, "Can't a person get one chance to make things right?" I lowered my gaze. "Of course they can." Then I looked back at him. "But I gave you a whole year to fix it, and you missed it." Chapter 15. By the third month, Ignacio and I would come downstairs together after work. We were both used to seeing Charles there, alone, thin, standing like a shadow that wouldn't fade. That day, because of a mistake I'd made at work, Ignacio had scolded me harshly. Afterward, he went to get the car. Charles frowned and walked over. "That's the man you chose? Why does he talk to you like that? In 10 years together, I never treated you that way." I shrugged. "This is the workplace. Charles, I'm here to work, not to be someone's little sweetheart. I'm designer Lisa, not wife Lisa." I glanced at him again. He looked even thinner. I sighed softly. "Charles, stop being so stubborn. We're done." He kept his head down, silent for a long while. Then he said, "We're not done. One person can't decide a breakup alone. Don't throw that word around so easily." He added, "If one day I lose hope and finally agree, then that'll really be the end of us." I froze. The words sounded familiar, though I couldn't remember when I'd heard them before. I sighed, got into Ignacio's car, and we drove off. Charles shouted after us, desperate, "Lisa, don't you have your own car?" I rolled down the window and looked back at him. "I'm going on a date with Ignacio. You really don't have to wait anymore." The coffee in his hand slipped, spilling all over the ground, and there, standing in that small mess of warmth and bitterness, Charles watched as our car disappeared from his sight. Chapter 16. The next time I saw Charles was a year later. He messaged me to say he'd applied for a transfer to another branch office in another city, and that he would never return to the capital again. He wanted to see me one last time. I thought about it for a while, then agreed. Charles had grown thinner. His face was still handsome, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When we crossed the street together, he instinctively reached out to take my hand, but the moment his fingers brushed mine, he pulled back. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Sorry, forgot we broke up." We sat in a cafe, watching the traffic outside as we talked about our lives. But halfway through, Charles suddenly went quiet. His gaze drifted toward the window, unfocused. I followed his eyes and saw a young boy and girl crossing the street. The boy held the girl's hand carefully, shielding her from passing scooters, one arm slightly raised to guard her shoulder. In his bright eyes was the kind of gentle protectiveness that only love could bring. Charles stared at them, motionless, until the couple disappeared from view. Then he smiled faintly at me. "That used to be us, didn't it?" But before he finished the sentence, his hand rose to cover his eyes. It took a long time before he lowered it again. His lashes were wet. He looked at me like I was his last bit of light. "Can't we really go back, Lisa? I can change everything, please." Tears slid quietly down his cheeks, one by one, dripping into his coffee. I let out a long sigh. "Charles, I used to have the same dream for 10 years. Every single time, it was you leaving me, abandoning me. But this past year, since we separated, I haven't dreamed at all. I sleep soundly through the night. I used to think the love you gave me was something I'd stolen from fate, that a girl like me, unwanted by anyone, didn't deserve it. But now I'm designer Lisa, a 2-time gold award winner of the youth design competition. I deserve every bit of recognition and every flower thrown my way. And I deserve Ignacio's love too, because we fought side by side to get here. That kind of love makes me happy." I leaned forward slightly. "So, Charles, let's end this, for real this time. If, one day, you feel like giving up on another girl, think of me, and let what I taught you be your warning. Charles stared down at the tears falling into his cup. He watched them for a long time, then picked up the coffee and drank it all in one gulp. I agree to break up. I'll probably never meet another Lisa again. I might end up alone for the rest of my life. But I wish you and Ignacio happiness. May you grow old together. The sunlight coming through the cafe's tall window fell softly across Charles's face. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the Charles from 10 years ago again, eyes bright, smile open and sincere. I nodded. I wish you happiness too. Then I stood and walked out of the cafe. The sun outside was warm and golden. The little girl who once had no one now deserved everything good in the world. Behind me, Charles called out, his voice trembling. Lisa, let me look at you one more time. I turned back to the man standing in the sunlight, still faintly carrying the shadow of the boy he once was. I waved at him. Thank you for being part of my story. From here on, let's both walk our own paths. Not far away, Ignacio was standing under the sun, holding 2 ice creams and waving at me. I smiled and ran toward him. Maybe he was my destined home. Maybe he was just a passing chapter. It didn't matter, because that little girl was no longer afraid of being left behind by anyone ever again.